Welcome to Artistic Adventures. This is part 2 of the Snape Project, and I know I said last week that I was going to work on the hair this week, but actually decided to work on the costume. So we'll do the costume in this one and work on hair next. For Snape's costume, we're going to have 3 pieces. We're going to have a coat, we're going to have pants, and we're going to have this over cape. And I believe I told you already that the cuffs and the collar, I'm just going to make them just to stick in and show, because I'm not going to make a whole shirt when all you see is this tiny little bit. So, to show you where we are at this point, I'll say that I picked fabrics based on the structure of each component. So I wanted this to be, the cape to be flowy and lighter, and the coat and pants to be a little bit thicker and, you know, would hold its shape more. I don't know what the technical term for that is. But anyway, I picked this for the cape. And actually, it's a satin. It's like a satiny material. But I'm going to use that on the inside. You can see it's got a shine. And use the matte for the outside. So I cut these 2 pieces that will be the front. And then this solid piece is going to be the back. And it's going to have a train. So the front's going to come to about right here, and then the back will trail out behind him. And that's just kind of how I envision it. We'll see how it all works out as I get to the point of sewing it together. So the way it looks like it's made is I'm going to sew a seam across here. We'll probably sew up to here on the side, leaving this open. And then I'm probably going to gather this up some, just a little bit, so that it sits on his shoulders. Although a little bit of it sort of hangs off like a cap sleeve over here. And that shouldn't be too hard. I think that'll be the easiest of all of this. So I'm going to put that aside for right now. And then I made my own little patterns for the coat and the trousers. And so you can see I made it long because this comes down to about his knee. Well, actually a little bit below the knee, looks like. So that's the back. And then I cut 2 pieces for the front. I want to explain that the reason I have this notch cut out is because I have to have a portion to fold under for so that it'll be, it'll look like, well, how do I explain this? This one is going to be a little bit bigger, and then this one will probably fold under almost at the same area and as the bottom part, almost. And then this will go over it, and then there'll be the opening, because if we'd made it come straight down, these would overlap. And in the picture, if you can see it, or you can look online yourself, it opens under the buttons and sort of flares out. The opening flares out, so it's kind of more like that. So that's how I cut it for that. And I left the top part up here kind of straight across, because what I'm hoping I'll be able to do is use this piece as a collar, and it'll come around from the back, and then it'll meet up in the front. And I'll sew this piece to the front and the back pieces of the jacket. And then just a sleeve, regular sleeve. Hopefully that'll fit. I always adjust as I sew with these things. Alright, so that's my idea for that. And then for the pants, how this will work is this, I cut 2 of these, and we'll sew this seam, and then we'll spread it and do the inseam. And I tried to make the bottom part kind of narrow, because that's kind of how his pants look. And then we'll just fold down the top part here and put some elastic in it. That's the plan. All right. So I'm going to start with what I think will be the easiest. Will be the pants. Probably. But maybe not. We'll see. So I'm going to go off. I'm going to turn the camera off to get my sewing machine up on the table and get everything set up. And then we'll be back and start putting this whole ensemble together. Starting with the pants, we're going to sew these back and front seams on the pants. It's kind of a different way to make pants, but it works. They'll have no side seams on the legs. They'll have a seam underneath the legs. All right, so once you get those seams, you sort of pull those apart, line up the seam underneath the two front and back seams so that they're together. And if you need to, pin this. I don't usually pin anything. And then we're going to start on one leg, go up to the crotch, and down the other leg. And that's it. That's a pretty easy pair of pants. So now I want to try them on just to see how they fit, because like I said, I wanted these to be kind of skinny legs pants for him. And then also to check on the waist to make sure I have plenty of room to fold down and put the elastic in. And everything looks really good. Really happy with that. So now we'll just pull them right back off. I did trim a little bit of the fabric off on the inside and on the seam, and then did some clipping of that curve in the front and back seam. And now I'm sewing the piece of elastic that I'm going to use together into a round circle. And I found a bottle that's about the right size. Slip the elastic on, the same size as the opening of the pants. And then slip the pants over, and they're wrong side out right now. And then we're just going to pull the piece of elastic over the top and pull it down so that there's enough of the fabric at the top to fold it over. This is just an easy way to do this without having to run the elastic through a teeny tiny little passageway of the pants like you would in a normal, like if you did these on human-sized pants, you could just sew the casing and then run the elastic through. This way you don't have to try to run the elastic through. That's kind of hard on these smaller dolls. So once you get it pulled out to where you have it even all the way around, and get you some needle and thread, because you will have to do this by hand. Then fold the top of the fabric down over the elastic so that you have a place where you can sew beneath the elastic underneath. I guess you could sew through the elastic if you had to, but it'd be kind of hard to sew through all that thickness. And then go ahead and just start sewing around the bottom of that fold over part. Now, the reason I do it this way is this stretches out the elastic so that when you pull it off, it goes back and it gathers it. But this way you can sew it, and it won't break your thread if you try to, pull the waistband out to get it on the doll. And this seemed like it was just right to pull over his hips and everything, so really didn't have to worry about the size of this too much. And I'm just doing a basic stitch around here, kind of a back stitch, I guess. And then you can pull that off, and as you see, it gathers it up and you have a nice little waistband. Now, because I'm going to hem these later and I don't want them to fray out, I'm going to go ahead and put some fray check around on the hem. You could actually put fray check on all of the outside seams of this. I didn't do it on the inner legs, but it always helps on these smaller things to keep things from fraying. Depends on the fabric. This fabric's not too bad. It ended up working out pretty good. It holds its shape. It's a nice fabric for a small suit because it's a little bit structured, but also it's not so thick that it doesn't that it's difficult to shape into a smaller size. Now I'm going to start the coat by sewing the two front pieces, and I did two front pieces because I'm going to use one of the pieces as lining, and that'll help us form those two cutout pieces in the front and make them look really nice. I'm not going to use two pieces in the back for the coat, but just in the front. So you see I've got that cutout piece. I'm going to sew just around that, and then we'll turn it and iron it so that it's a nice cutout shape that has a finished look to it. And I did trim clip the inside of that so that it would turn nicely. And I'm turning on my little baby iron to get hot, so when we finish this other side, we'll be ready to iron out those front pieces. So doing the same thing to the other side, and as you see there, I'm going to cut up to that point and then cutting off the point of that edge. And that just is so when you turn it, there's not a bunch of fabric keeping it from taking the shape that you want. So we're going to go ahead and turn that, and you can use a blunt product like a end of a paintbrush or whatever to push that little tiny corner out. I used the point of my blunt scissors, anything you can use that's blunt to get that point turned out. Now, like I said, for the back, I'm only going to use one piece. I'm not going to use two pieces, because I don't really need it to line anything of the back. We're going to finish all those seams. So pushing that one out a little bit more with a paintbrush handle. And once I get it pushed out, then we're going to lay it down on this pad of fabric that I have so I can iron it. I love this little iron. It's just so handy. And it's easier to use. And I don't know. I sometimes I'm afraid to burn myself with a bigger iron when I'm doing things like this because I kind of have to hold it, till I get the iron on it. And this way it just seems like it works a lot better. And I'm not quite so afraid of burning myself. And it gets really hot, though. Had to watch. There were places on here where I want to, sometimes when you heat something too much, it'll make it shiny. So you just have to watch that with this fabric a little bit. There were places where it looked like it was going to start making it shiny. All right, so I got that ironed out. And then we're just going to do the same thing to the other one. Get that one nice and ironed out. And then just because I wanted them to hold their shape, one of the things that I wanted to do was just run a stay stitch in here on the outside edge there. That's going to be the side seam. And I ran it really close to the edge so it wouldn't show when I did my actual seam of the front to the back. But this is just to help it keep its shape while I'm working with it. You can do that or not, doesn't matter. So now I'm going to sew the shoulder seams. That's hard to say. Sew the shoulder seams right across the top there on both sides, putting the two outside pieces together. So front to back on one side, and once we get that done, then we'll go ahead and do the other side. Now when you're doing this, you want to make sure that you have enough room at the neck to have it fit the doll correctly. That was one of the things I was watching since I made this pattern up myself, is wanted to make sure I had room because I'm going to put that little collar on it, and I needed to have room for that to stand up and not be too close to the neck or too tight against the neck. So we'll do that a little bit later, but now that I have the two fronts attached to the back, I'm going to put the sleeves on. And before I do actually attach the sleeves, I want to hem the sleeves so it's easier than trying to do it after you sew the sleeves seam together and make it too small to get the sewing machine to it. So just take that apart and turn up a tiny hem. So to make sure I'm getting it the right length, I'm just going to measure it against his shoulder with a seam at the top, and then it sort of lets me know how much seam I can turn up on the bottom. So just turned up about 1/4 of an inch, maybe a little bit less, and sewed that so it gives it a nice finish. I could have done the pants that way. I didn't really think about it at the time, so I'll end up sewing those by hand later. And now to put this together, you're going to put the two right sides together, and I always start by putting the middle of the sleeve to the shoulder seam of the jacket. And then I put the the two edges together on either side. And I do that because it's easier to then work any fullness you have in the sleeve in with pins. Now this sleeve is not going to be gathered, so it fits almost perfectly without having to do much easing, but there was just maybe just a tiniest little gap. And you just do that by constantly putting pins in to the middle section and working the gap out with your fingers. And that made it so that it doesn't look like it's gathered, or that there's an area that gets folded over while you're sewing, which wouldn't look good. You know, as men's sleeves, you typically don't want to have it look like it's gathered. Female sleeve, you might. But this makes it look more like a jacket, or even a shirt for a male doll or a male person. I guess now I have to try to make a shirt for a male doll. I don't know. Making these little tiny things sometimes especially when they're very structured, and they have to fit a certain way. I like more loose, flowy things. All right, so that turned out really well, that sleeve. And now I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. So we're going to match up the middle of the sleeve to the shoulder seam of the coat, and start there. And then I'm going to kind of speed this part up because you've already seen me do this one time, and it's exactly the same as I did on the other side. So put the two ends together and then ease out any fullness and pin it, and then sew it, take the pins out, and we've got another nice looking sleeve. All right, so now we're ready to sew the jacket together. So what we're going to do is start at the end of the sleeve, match up the under the arm seams, and then go down the side of the coat all the way to the hem of the coat. And we'll do this on both sides. So you see now you've already got the sleeve hemmed, so you don't really have to worry about doing anything else to the sleeve at this point. If you hadn't, you would have had to try to turn that under that little tiny opening and hem it. And it's best to avoid those little tiny openings as much as possible. And I did clip under the arm seam so that it would turn nicely. And then looking at the neckline, I'm going to make a little collar that I feel is about the same length. And I did that using a folded piece of the fabric, and then I'm just going to sew a seam down the ends so I can turn it, and then that'll make my little stand-up collar. So that's what I'm doing here, is just sewing across the ends of that folded piece. Now here I'm just going to measure it to make sure I've got it the same length as the neck opening, which is all the way around from the front, the back, and then the other side of the front. And you may want to measure this if you're doing this yourself, unless you've done things like this a lot like I have. I just always eyeball it. And I'm really fortunate that most of the time it turns out okay. That's just something because I've done this so many times, sewing and making little things and just matching them up. I have pretty good way to eyeball it and make sure that I'm I'm making it the right size. All right, so now what we're going to do is get this little collar turned and press it a little bit to flatten it out so it'll be easier to sew. Once again, being careful not to iron my fingers. Yeah, that's going to turn out pretty nice. And then before I sew it, though, I'm going to trim it just a little bit and put some fray check on it. Since this will be right at the neckline, I don't want it to start unraveling and look ugly. Although you're probably not going to really see it much because the coat's going to be sewed together in the front, but I just think it'll be easier to handle. So I'm putting fray check on the two edges here. I'm going to set that aside to dry. I'm going to, after it's dry, then go back and put the two right sides together, right side of the coat to the right side of the collar, although actually the collar is the same on both sides, so it doesn't matter, but put it to the right side of the coat. Starting on one side, I'm going to pin it, kind of just have that collar overlap the front part just a tad because I want that to the way it's folded, I want it to fold up right at where the top of the coat ends. All right. So now I've got that pinned all together, and we're going to sew that down. And we're going to hope this all works out great. First time I've ever done this, but especially well, I've actually done this, I guess, on a human size garment, but now we've got our little stand-up collar, and I'm going to iron that in a minute. But for right now, I want to get the sleeves turned, get everything folded out, and then we can actually iron the entire jacket at the same time. So I'm just using the end of a paintbrush, something blunt, to fold out, to turn the sleeves out to the right side. So it's looking good so far. Let's hope it fits perfectly. So his jacket is very fitted. It's not a loose jacket, and that's one of the things that was really trying to work on with that pattern that I made out of the paper towels when I held it up against him was, to have room for the seam, but to have it be very fitted. And I could always go back and take up more of the seam if I had to, but we'll see how this works out. And right now, I'm just clipping the inside of that collar and the seam of the coat because it's a little stiff, and as I'm turning it, it's pulling. So I'm just going to clip that down to the seam almost, and that's going to help ease that fabric so that when we turn it, it won't be pulling at the seam. All right, now we can put the little iron on it, and hopefully we'll get it to stand up properly. So far, so good. But we still got to put it on the doll and hope that it fits. This iron has 4 heat settings. So I've got it on 4. Might be able to use 3 with this fabric. Like I said, I don't want to make it shiny. All right, so we're putting it on the doll, and so far, yes, looking good. I'm going to be able to overlap it just enough that I'll be able to sew it. And then we'll put some sort of little something to make it look like buttons on the front. If you look at the picture of his costume, he has like all these little tiny buttons down the front. And I would guess on the original costume, they're probably self buttons, which is it's a metal button that's covered with the fabric of the coat, and they look like they're the same. They're very matte looking, and they're rounded, so it looks like they're probably covered with the fabric of the coat. Of course, we're not going to be able to do that because A, they don't make little self buttons for something that's small, and we won't really need buttons because I'm actually going to sew the coat on him. Right now, I'm just going to iron out the sleeves and everything, just like a regular garment. This is going to look nicer and more structured when it's ironed. and that helps it flow a little bit better on the body. All right, looking good. Whew, I'm so glad it fit. I was really worried about this. Maybe that's why I sort of unconsciously did the costume next, because I was really worried about this coat. Now this is the cape, and what I'm doing, I sewed the top's shoulder seam, and now I'm going to sew the side down. I came down about 2.5, 3 inches, and now I'm going to sew the side seam of the cape. You can see there, that's the front attached to the back, one of the sides of the front. I've already done the other side, but I have to make that armhole opening, so I came down about 2.5, 3 inches. You just kind of have to hold it up against the doll and see how much you need to come down. And as I said, the front will be a little bit shorter than the back. I'm having the back come out in sort of a train. I always remember that picture of him. I can't remember if it's in the next to the last Harry Potter film, where he's walking down the road going up to the mansion where Voldemort and all his people are waiting. And I think it's the Malfoy's mansion. And the gate's closed, and he walks up, and he's got that cape flowing behind him, and he just walks right through the gate. This cape kind of flares out behind him. I just love that scene. I don't know why. Because I love Snape. I do. All right, so there's the opening, and I did turn the edges under and hem those with the sewing machine. Starting at the shoulder seam and working down on both sides. And now we've got the two front pieces of the cape together. We've got the armholes done. And now what we're going to do is hem. It's a big long hem. And it's going to be the neckline and the front and the bottom of the cape is all going to be one long hem. This is all one edge. And I'm going to start, you can see there, that's the opening at the neck. So I'm going to actually start at the neckline area, because that's the part that I want to make sure that I get sort of symmetrical looking. So I'm starting on one shoulder and then working across the neck, hemming it, just turning a little 1/4 inch under. And the reason I wanted to start up there is because it's not going to turn under very easily there where the seams are, and I just want to get that done properly before I get to the rest of it, which is just turning it under. I always like to do the hard parts first. I don't know why. Maybe that just makes everything seem less stressful. I don't know. And as you can see, this fabric, it has that shine to it. That's actually the right side that I've used as the wrong side, but it's nice because it kind of looks like a lining on the cape, which I would think would be more shiny. Would in my imaginary world anyway. So I've already hemmed all the rest of the cape and put that aside, and then and I did hem it. I mean, I did iron the hem too. That also made it lay down a little bit better. And now I've gone back to the pants, turned them inside out, turned up a little tiny hem, and I'm just putting really small stitches in to hem this. I'm doing it in small stitches because when I put the feet through, I don't want the toes or whatever to catch the thread and pull it out. Doing the same thing on the other side. I'm just putting in really close together stitches to hem these pants. And of course my thread had to come unthreaded there. That always has to happen. Why is that? Does that happen with you guys? All right, so just finishing up here on this other pant leg. And wow, we're almost finished. This is so exciting. All right, get those turned, and now just like with the coat, these will be nicer if we just iron them. And I'm putting it so that the seam would be in the front and back, or not the seam, but the fold, the crease where I'm ironing it. So I'm just kind of turning those so that that inner seam is in the middle of the pant leg, and then the crease will be in the front and the back. Although it's actually not creased. This fabric doesn't iron to the point where it creases. It'll smooth it and settle it, but it doesn't really make it crease. Also, I think I cut it out of my video because I had a little mishap where I had sewed the cape together. They took the wrong pieces together. And I put some gathers up at the top of the shoulders of the cape. So I think I missed that part to show you, but you can see there, right there, there's gathers up at the top, just like in his pictures. All right, now the buttons. How are we going to do that? So what I decided is to make them out of polymer clay and just glue them on. So I'm rolling out a piece of black polymer clay. I roll it into a ball and then smoosh it. And that flattens it out but keeps it round and sort of dome-like. And if I look at that on his coat, it looks to be about the right size. So I'm just going to do the same thing with all these little blobs. I don't know how many I'm going to actually need. So I'm just going to do a whole lot so I have plenty. Because I have to bake these. So you could do these, I don't know, you could do these maybe different ways. I thought about at one point using embroidery thread and just making a knot and making that the button, like a knot, a big knot. But that wouldn't really look like what is on his authentic costume. So in the effort to be a little bit authentic, I'm going to do it this way. Because this, I think, will look almost exactly like the little buttons. So put on a little piece of aluminum foil. I baked these for 15 minutes since they're so small. I didn't have to bake them very long. And then I'm just going to use some clear tacky glue. And I'm putting this out here because I'm going to use a pointy tool to just use a tiny bit of glue. So hopefully I'm not going to get it all over the coat, which I have a tendency to do with glue. I don't know why. I get glue everywhere. So I'm just going to put a little dab of glue with the tip of this pointy tool. And then we'll pick up the clay, and I thought I was going to pick it up with my finger by pressing it on it, but the clay was a little bit stuck to the aluminum foil, so it didn't work. So when you're doing this, you kind of have to move the little buttons around before you start picking them up with your finger. Like I always like if I moisten the end of my finger a little bit. This is the same with crystals, then I can pick them up. I didn't think about using my little tool I have to pick up crystals. That would have probably worked too. But just spacing these out, and I ended up having enough with 2 extra, which is good because I ended up losing one and then I needed another one. So always make more than you need. Look, I even folded this up and threw it away, and I had to go through the trash and get it out because one of them fell off at some point. I don't know how that happened. Now, I had the stand that came with the Jasper doll. Oh, by the way, this is a Jasper doll. It's not a Jacob doll. I was saying Jacob in the first video. Sorry about that. I knew it was Jay, and I knew it wasn't Edward. So I was saying Jacob, and I'm sorry. Everybody kept saying that everybody knew it wasn't Jasper Jacob, because Jacob has black hair, and he was the werewolf guy. Anyway, so I want to fix this up. So I thought a slithering crest would be a nice addition. I painted over the Twilight words that were on it, the logo that said Twilight, with black paint. And then found this on the internet and printed it out. And I glued it to the stand. After the glue dried, I came back and put some coats of this Liquitex High Gloss Varnish on both the paper of the slithering logo and the top of the thing. And you can see it turned out pretty nice and glossy. And then around the edges of the logo, to make it look nicer, I took silver acrylic paint and my little dot tool and put little silver dots around the edge to just sort of give it a, I don't know, embossed look. It's sort of 3D with those little dots. I thought that turned out nice. And here's our buttons all glued down. They turned out nice. So let's put our doll on the stand and see how it looks. So he's kind of stands with one leg. I don't know. He's not standing like flat. Like, anyway, that stand actually is made for him because it fits the way he's standing. And then you have one arm crooked or bent and one arm straight. And his arms will go out at the shoulders. There's like a ball joint at the shoulders, which is nice. So I thought we're going to pose him in the end. We'll pose him with his arm out, the one that's out with the magic wand in it. And then, the other arm, however. So there's our finished costume, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. I think looks pretty much like Snape in the movies and in the pictures. You see, I did put the shoes on him after I carved off the parts that looked like tennis shoes and got down to the black. And nice thin-legged pants and coat that, opens in the front. And the little buttons. Yeah, so now we've got to put the hair on him and make him a wand, and that'll be our Snape project, which I think's turned out pretty well. I hope you enjoyed this. I've had kind of fun. Yep, so we'll work on the hair and the wand next. That'll be the next video and probably the last video. So if you like this video, please give me a big thumbs up. That always helps. And as usual, I hope that you subscribe because I don't want you to miss a thing. Thanks, and bye.